Heidi ho! Today we're going to talk about an approach to analyzing and discussing writing called the Toulmin method. Stephen Toulmin, whose picture you see here, wrote a number of books in the 1950s and 60s that analyze and explain the parts of an argument. Now, you need to understand that argument is used differently in the academy, in other words, in post-secondary education, than it's used in our everyday language. When we talk in everyday language to friends and so forth, if we say we have an argument, we mean that we have been discussing a controversial issue with someone, usually with some emotion involved. Okay? That's not what argument means in the academy. In the academy, in college, an argument is defined as any piece of writing that has a thesis statement and uses evidence to support the thesis statement. It doesn't even have to be about a controversial issue. In academic writing, a paper discussing the symptoms, diagnosis, treatment, and prognosis of type 2 diabetes would be considered an argument, even though it's not a controversial topic and experts by and large agree on aspects of the illness. Now, Toulmin maintains that parts of an argument remain constant, regardless of the field that the argument addresses. They also remain constant regardless of the other aspects of the rhetorical situation. In other words, the audience, the purpose, and the medium that's used, which means whether you're speaking or you're writing or you're making a video or you're involved in a discussion on the internet, the basic parts of a discussion remain the same. The Toulmin method is very useful, and there are several things that we can use it for. One is to use it as a method of analyzing other people's writing. You've already looked at a video on how to annotate. One of the ways that you can break down a piece of writing into chunks is by dividing it up based on the parts of a discussion or an argument, if you will, that Toulmin identifies. In fact, it makes for a very convenient way to break up a piece of writing and to annotate it. Also, it can be used as you go on in school and depending on your topic to analyze the validity of other people's writings and possibly find topics for papers whereby you can expand on what they write or question the data or find problems with the way that the data or the reasons are used to support the claim. That sentence didn't necessarily make a whole lot of sense to you because it uses Toulmin terminology, but it will by the end of this video. It also can be used to help structure your own writing. When you go to do the scratch outline, for example, that you'll be doing for this paper, and when you go to analyze it, it helps if you keep Toulmin's parts of an argument in mind, because it will help you, for example, keep all the information on one subtopic of your paper together so that paragraphs and sections of your paper will be correctly focused and correctly organized, and you won't be jumping back and forth. And finally, and one of the main reasons that we're studying this is because it provides us with some common terminology that we can use as a class. In talking about parts of your paper and how to organize your paper, it helps if we're all using the same terms to mean the same things. It will help you understand what I'm telling you. Also, these are the terms that I use when I grade your paper, so it will help you in revising and learning to write if we all use the same terminology. The first part of an argument or a discussion or a paper, remember an argument doesn't mean a disagreement, right, that we're going to discuss is the claim. The claim is the same thing as the thesis statement. And in this class, I will admit, we kind of use the terms claim and thesis statement interchangeably. Thesis statement is a term that's used mainly in humanities disciplines, particularly in English departments. That's pretty much an English teacher thing. But the term claim is used in other disciplines as well. And of course, since the purpose of this class is to get you ready to write papers for other classes, and most of you will take more classes in the sciences and the social sciences than you will in the humanities, it's good to know what they might say. And a professor in political science or psychology might refer to a claim, and you might not know what that means if you don't know that it's the same thing that your English teachers call a thesis statement. Okay, so I want you to be comfortable with both terms. Basically, the claim is the main point that your paper is going to make. It is the point that your paper is attempting to prove the validity of. And we're going to talk about that to a greater degree when we talk about writing working claims or working thesis statements. Basically, every sentence in your paper, every sentence, works to support the claim and to prove its validity. Anything in your paper that doesn't work to support the claim is off the focus of the paper. And focus is one of the areas that it's important to keep in mind when you write any paper, and it's definitely one of the areas that grades are based on in this class. Now we're going to talk in more detail in the video on writing working thesis statements or working claims about this. But a strong claim includes something called a plan of development. And that's another term that we're going to use in this class. Plan of development is not a Toulmin term. It's more of an English teacher term. But it's something that we will be using a lot in this class, so it's a term that you need to be familiar with. A strong claim or a strong thesis includes a plan of development that lists the major points that are discussed in the paper, what is referred to in Toulmin terms as reasons, in the order they are discussed. Let's state that again, because your grade is based in part on this. Okay? A strong claim or thesis statement includes a plan of development that lists the major points that are discussed in the paper in the order that they are discussed in the paper. Let's take a look at a sample claim. As we're working on paper 1, I am going to use as an example a paper that might be written on whether antidepressant medications should be prescribed or available by prescription to people under the age of 18. This is a paper that I have assigned in the past, and so I have student sample papers that we can use for this course. This might be what the sample claim for one of those papers, for a paper on that topic, might look like. Remember that your first paper is going to discuss what supporters and critics say about a particular controversial issue. And since you have to be fair and you have to discuss both points equally, a good sample claim will state the main points that both the supporters and the critics make. Because the supporters and the critics might make major points about different topics, instead of disagreeing on the same subtopics, I meant subtopics, okay? Your claim might actually need to be 2 sentences long, as this one is. So let's take a look at this sample claim, keeping in mind that we're going to look at this and study this in more depth in a future video. And this claim reads, supporters of prescribing antidepressants for patients under the age of 18 state that misconceptions about the medications contribute to the large number of untreated cases. Antidepressants are the most effective way of treating depression in people of all ages, and antidepressants decrease the risk of suicide associated with depression. On the other hand, critics of prescribing antidepressants for patients under the age of 18 state that the medications could have detrimental effects on young developing brains. The effectiveness of antidepressants is debatable, and antidepressants increase the risk of suicide. Okay, now by reading this claim, we know that the subtopics that are going to be discussed on the supporters' side is that misconceptions about the medications contribute to the number of untreated cases of depression. Another thing that this writer is going to talk about is that antidepressants are the best way of treating depression in all people. And another main point that we're going to make, or main subtopic that we're going to discuss in this paper, is that antidepressants decrease the risk of suicide. We also are going to discuss 3 reasons for the critics. And the main points that the critics make that we're going to have, that are going to be subtopics we're going to discuss in our paper, is that the medications might have bad effects on younger brains that are still developing, that whether or not antidepressants are effective is even somewhat questionable, and that antidepressants actually increase the risk of suicide. So keep those in mind. Those lists of subtopics, that's what we mean by the plan of development in the claim. Okay? And for reasons that we'll discuss when you watch that other video on writing working thesis statements and working claims, listing the reasons in the order that they're discussed in the paper, in other words, in the plan of development, will affect your grade and actually is beneficial for a number of reasons, but that's the topic for the other video. Okay. The next Toulmin term that we're going to discuss is reasons. Now, reasons, again, that term is used differently in Toulmin terminology than it is in everyday life. In everyday life, if we say there's a reason, we mean specifically that it responds to the question, why? But that's not what a reason is in Toulmin terminology. A reason is simply the major points to support the claim. They are the subtopics in the paper. If you remember when you learned how to write a basic 5-paragraph essay in high school, whether that was last year or 10 years ago, you were taught about something called the topic sentence. And the topic sentence for a paragraph states the subtopic of the paper that that paragraph is going to talk about. The reason is the same thing. We are using the term reason instead of topic sentence because the sections of the paper that discuss and develop those major points to support the claim could well be more than one paragraph long. So we use the term reasons instead of topic sentence. And what a reason does, as I've said, is it introduces the section that presents evidence that's connected to that particular subtopic. Okay, going back to that sample claim that we worked with before, let's look at what the sample reasons were and how they would be stated at the beginning of sections of a paper that had that claim. One reason, as summarized in the plan of development in the claim, would be about what supporters say about how misconceptions about the medication lead to untreated depression. Remember when we talked about that statement in the plan of development? Okay. There would be a section of the paper that might begin with a sentence that reads along the lines of, supporters of prescribing antidepressants for young people state that many cases of depression go untreated because of misconceptions about the medications. See how that was summarized in the claim in the plan of development? Okay, now that would introduce a section that might be one paragraph, it might be two paragraphs. In longer articles, not in the paper that you're writing for this class, but a section on that could go on for 2 or 3 pages. That's what makes a reason different from a topic sentence, because each paragraph has a topic sentence. A reason introduces, it is the same thing as a topic sentence, but it introduces a section that might be more than one paragraph. Okay? So, after the entire section that discusses how misconceptions about antidepressant contribute to the number of untreated cases of depression, we could easily run across in the paper a sentence that says, supporters state that a more important reason for prescribing antidepressants to adolescents is that the medications provide the most effective method for treating depression. Now that would introduce a section of the paper that would discuss probably studies that had been done and statistics that are available that support the idea that antidepressants are the most effective way for treating depression. And that could be a paragraph or 2 paragraphs or 3 paragraphs. And then we would come to a statement that might read along the lines of, however, supporters state that the most important reason for prescribing antidepressants to youth is that the medications reduce the risk of suicide. And that statement would introduce a section that discusses how antidepressants reduce the risk of suicide in people who take them, both people the age of 18 and under. Then as we read on in our paper, we might run into a sentence that says, critics maintain that antidepressants should not be prescribed to patients under 18 because they could have detrimental effects on the young developing brain. And you recall how that sentence was summarized in the plan of development in the claim. Okay. So this statement would then introduce a section about that would present the evidence that the critics use to support the idea that these medications might hurt young brains that are still developing. And then, after you finish that section, either writing it or reading it, you might come to a sentence that states, critics also state that the effectiveness of antidepressants in treating depression is questionable. And that would open a section that could be one paragraph or two paragraphs or three paragraphs that present evidence, including probably some statistics based on studies that have been done, that question whether antidepressants are even very effective in treating depression. And then finally, we might come across in writing or reading this paper a statement that says, critics state that the most important reason that antidepressants should not be prescribed for adolescents is that they can increase the risk of suicide. And this sentence would open an entire section that would discuss what the critics say about how antidepressants increase the risk of suicide. Now, what's important to remember is that each one of these sentences, first of all, the information is summarized, as we saw, in the plans of development in our two-sentence claim, and each one of these sentences would introduce an entire section of the paper. Each section might be one paragraph, some sections might be two paragraphs, some sections might be three or more paragraphs. It depends on what your research reveals and what information you choose to put in the paper. Okay. So, let's do a quick review at this point. The claim makes the major point that your entire paper is going to prove. The claim includes a plan of development that summarizes the main points that you're going to use in your paper to support the claim. In other words, the main subtopics of your paper. Then the reasons are the statements that introduce the sections that discuss the subtopics that are named in the plan of development in the claim. Let me repeat that so that you can take this down as a note, because it's important that you see how these things work together. The reasons are sentences that you will spread throughout the paper that will introduce the subtopics that are named in the plan of development in your claim. That's how reasons relate to the claim. Okay. The third Toulmin term that we're going to work with in this class is data. Data is the evidence that's provided to support the reasons. In our class, the data is going to be the information that you gather from sources. Now, in some classes, for example, in a lab class in biology, the data will be the results of your lab experiment. You will find as you move on in your academic career that in the sciences and the social sciences, most data is based on some kind of statistical analysis of an experiment or a survey or some type of a study. But it doesn't necessarily have to be mathematics, and it doesn't necessarily have to be based on a study to be called data. Okay. If I were to write a paper that the winter weather in Las Vegas is much nicer than winter weather in Chicago, I might write about the fact that the wind blows much more in Chicago than it does in Las Vegas. And I might talk about the velocity of the wind, but I'll also talk a lot about the fact that the reason for the wind in Chicago is because it's located on Lake Michigan, and that's called a lake effect. And the fact that Chicago is located on Lake Michigan and that the wind comes from the lake and why that happens, that has nothing to do with math, but it's still called data. The data will represent the majority of your paper. It's very simple. The claim is one or maybe two sentences at the end of the introduction. The reasons, as we saw, there were 6 of them for this particular paper. Each one of those reasons has to be supported by data. The data, since the reasons are sentences that introduce sections of your paper, obviously there's going to be more than one sentence in each section that provides evidence that supports that reason in Toulmin terms. Okay? So clearly the data is going to be the majority of your paper. In other words, for this class, the information that you take from sources is going to be the majority of your paper. It's not your opinion, it's not what you think, it's not what you believe, wish, hope, dream, or anything else. It is what you take from the sources that will make up most of your paper. Now, there are several other aspects of Toulmin reasoning, but they get kind of complicated, and there's something that you might study as you go on in school. You may well study it even in 102. But the only other Toulmin term that we're going to discuss is qualifiers. Qualifiers are words that are included in the claim, reasons, and even the data. Okay? And they're words such as those that we see in the graphic. Okay? What they do is they acknowledge the limitations of a statement. Very, very, very few things in the world are always true. So that's why we need qualifiers. Words such as sometimes, rarely, frequently, most, few, many. Not only does it acknowledge the limitations of the statement, but it also helps us establish credibility with our audience. And that's an extremely important thing. If the audience thinks that you are not being honest intentionally, that you are intentionally misleading them, or that you don't know what you're talking about, your paper, from the moment that you make a statement that causes that problem with the audience, you may as well stop writing. Because once you've lost credibility with an audience, there is no reason for you to write anything. Establishing credibility with an audience is called ethos. And it's definitely something that will affect your grade in this paper. It also, and both of the papers of this class for that matter, it's also a very important aspect of dealing with people to keep in mind throughout life. You have to maintain credibility with people. Once people think that you are a liar, you may as well stop interacting with them, because nothing you say is going to mean anything to them. They are always going to question what you say once they know you lie. We see this in politics all the time. We definitely see it in economics, and we see it in our personal relationships. Qualifiers can help that. If we are honest and we don't say that someone always does something, if we can pin that down to either they usually do it, they frequently do it, they sometimes do it, or they rarely do it, then we're limiting the scope of our statement in a way that makes the statement more honest. And it helps us establish credibility with our audience as writers and with people that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis in our life outside of school. And that, of course, it also improves the validity of what we're saying. If you say something is always true, if you don't say that it's usually true or frequently true, which of course don't mean the same thing, it makes what you're saying more valid. If I say that it is always cold when the wind blows over the mountains, that's not particularly valid. But if I say in the winter, it is often cold when the wind blows over the mountains, well, that's a much more valid statement, isn't it? Okay, now, there's something very important about all this, and we're discussing it now because we're really going to talk about organizing our papers in separate videos, one for paper 1 and one for paper 2. But there is a basic organizational pattern that all of the organizational schemes are based on, okay? And the organization of the paper and the method that you use to collect the information for the paper are the opposite of each other. And it's very important that you understand that. Okay? The basic organization of a paper, and it's going to vary depending on the type of paper that you write, as you'll find when we start working on paper 2. But for the basic organizational scheme that all other organizational schemes are based on has a claim that's stated at the end of the introduction. Okay? And there will be 6 basic organizational schemes, 2 introductions that we'll talk about before we do paper 2. For paper 1, and most likely in most cases for paper 2, and for most academic papers that you write, you'll use something that's called a broad statement introduction. And it opens with a broad general statement. And then each sentence in the introduction becomes more specific, and it narrows so that it leads directly to the claim that's going to be in your paper, and the claim is stated at the end of the introduction. Here's an example that we might use to lead up to the sample claim that we had earlier. This is a sample introduction. Throughout history, different methods have been used to treat mental illness. Now, this is a broad, general statement. It's also a statement that people aren't going to tend to disagree with. Yeah, throughout history, they've used different things, different ways to treat mental illness. Okay. Currently, medications are often prescribed for various mental health conditions, including depression. Okay, now we've moved from all kinds of different methods and all kinds of different mental illnesses to specifically medications and specifically depression, which is moving a step closer to what our claim is. The next sentence is, while prescription antidepressants are effective in treating depression in adults, there is widespread disagreement regarding prescribing these medications to patients under 18 years old. Okay, so now we've moved from antidepressants, pardon me, to a discussion about the fact that people disagree about whether these meds should be used in people who are under 18 years old. that leads directly to our claim, which is that supporters state that antidepressants should be available for patients under 18 for the reasons that we listed, and critics state that they shouldn't be available for patients under 18 for the reasons that we looked at. Right? So you see how a broad statement introduction begins with a very, very broad statement, and then each sentence becomes more specific until it leads directly into our claim. And that's really all you need to know about writing the introduction for the first paper. Okay, so getting back to our basic organization. The claim is stated at the end of the introduction. Then the reasons are stated at the beginning of sections of the paper, and each of those sections is developed with the data. So papers are organized by claim, then a reason, then the data that supports that reason, then another reason, then the data that supports that reason, then another reason, and the data that supports that reason, and so forth. Okay. And as I said, those sections are developed with data. So it goes claim, reason, data, then reason, data, and so forth. That's not how it's researched. Okay. The research is actually the opposite of the way the paper is organized. The data is collected first. And that, of course, is done by doing research, which in our case is by studying our sources. After studying sources, we come up with subtopics that the data tends to fall under. And those subtopics that are based on the data become our reasons. And then we summarize our reasons to put in the plan of development to write our claim. So the paper is organized, claim, reason, data, reason, data, reason, data. But the research is done. Data is collected first, then we write the reasons, then we write the claim. Papers are driven by the research. That's what we mean when we say that papers are research driven. We don't actually decide on a claim and reasons and then conduct research to support them. That's how we end up with biased papers. That's how most Americans think. They make a decision, and then they come up with reasons that they have made the decision they've made, and then they come up with evidence that supports those reasons. That's why decision-making in this country is so bad. Because people only look at one side of an issue. They look at a side of an issue that supports what they already think. And they write based on reading support for what they already think. That is the opposite of critical thinking. That's kind of knee-jerk reacting. And that's what in psychology is called a rationalization. It's making a decision and then coming up with reasons that support it. That's not what critical thinking is. Critical thinking is gathering all the information, weighing the information that you've collected, and then reaching a decision. And critical thinking is a major skill that employers look for. It's also a skill that will serve you very well in life. If you collect all the information you can find about different makes and models of cars, and then you make a comparison about those, and you look at what's important to you in buying a car, then you can make a decision that is going to make you happy. and that is going to be the right decision for you. It's not necessarily the right decision for everyone, but it is the right decision for you. A person with 4 children is going to want different things from a car than a 20-year-old single person. If I were 20 and single, I'd want some cute little red 2-seater convertible because that would drive really fast and would look really cool. If I had 4 kids, I would be more interested in safety and roominess and the ability to clean the vehicle fairly easily, knowing that the kids are going to eat in the car and so forth. Okay? It's not that one decision is right and another decision is wrong. It's based on what you need, and you can't know that. You can't know what is right for you unless you look at all the available data. Writing classes teach you a lot more than just how to write and where to put the commas. They also teach you how to collect information and then make decisions based on the information you collect, as opposed to making some knee-jerk reaction. Okay? Okay, so that's the end of this little presentation. Thank you so much for listening. Remember, if you have any questions about this presentation or anything at all in the class, don't hesitate to email me at deborah.oakey@csn.edu. And of course, that email address is on the very front page on Canvas that introduces our course, so you can always find it there. It's also on the syllabus. It's in a number of other places. And we know already, don't we, that you have to email me from an account other than Canvas, because I don't check Canvas email, right? Cool. We're in good shape. Okay, thank you so much again for paying attention to this and taking notes on it. Do learn these terms because we're going to use them throughout the semester in discussing papers. So make sure that you know what a claim is, what reasons are, what data is, what qualifiers are, and what plan of development is. Okay? Make sure that you can identify those and know how to use them in your paper. So, thanks again. We will get together again very soon, I'm sure. In the meantime, work hard, have some fun, enjoy life.